Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to take part in this debate as the front bench spokesperson for the SNP group on health. I would like to pay tribute to Charles Kennedy. Obviously, I didn't know him here, but I was a graduate of Glasgow University and was a contemporary of Charles, who spoke eloquently and entertainingly at our first medical year reunion. I'm honoured to have been elected by the people of Central Ayrshire to be their member in this Parliament for the next 5 years. My predecessor, Brian Donohoe, was their MP for 23 years, initially for Cunningham South and then lately for Central Ayrshire. He served on the Transport Committee and even took on additional duty as a special constable for the British Transport Police, something he was intensely proud of. Now that he's freed from the trammels and duties of being an MP, I know he plans to develop his hobby of flying remote-controlled helicopters, which will at least keep him out from under the feet of his lovely wife, Christine. Unfortunately, he doesn't golf, which is the other alternative. I wish both of them well in his retirement. Central Ayrshire is a coastal constituency with beautiful sandy beaches all along its coast. In the south, Prestwick Airport is Scotland's oldest passenger airport, and actually where Elvis stopped off on his way back from national service in Germany in 1960.
He's on the British tour.
Yeah, well, we now hear that he was out drinking with Tommy Steele, so we're not going to go down that one. It is the site of an aerospace park, and as many of you will know, is on the shortlist for consideration as a future spaceport. Unfortunately, the passenger numbers have dropped, but a recent report shows the benefit we would accrue from a drop in air passenger duty. It would bring back our European visitors to our lovely county and help rejuvenate our tourist industry. Prestwick Golf Club was also the site of the first ever Open Golf Championship in 1860. But that competition is now more closely associated with its neighbour, where I live, in Royal Troon. Royal Troon will be hosting the British Open next year, so I invite all of you, though you can't have a spare bed in my house, I'm afraid. Book early. Despite the obvious beauty and wealth in Troon, it too now hosts a food bank. In the north, Irvine is both an old town and a new town, in that it was a royal borough in 1372 that was suddenly surrounded by modern blocks in the 60s. Regeneration of the town centre, and particularly the harbour side, is ongoing, but it contains two of the most deprived wards in my constituency. Inland, in the rolling Ayrshire countryside, there is a chain of villages, from the ancient settlement of Dreghorn, childhood home of our First Minister, through Dundonald with its fine castle and Symington with its beautiful church, to the mining villages in the south of Anbank and Mossblown. Sadly, they lost their mines decades ago and are still left stranded, bereft of work and poorly connected, whether by transport or digital services. Tarbolton is the site where Robert Burns, our national bard, founded the Bachelors' Club. As you might imagine from the name, this debating club was for men only. And the first immortal toast given at a Burns supper by a woman was just this year. We take a bit of time in Ayrshire. Now that the county of his birth is completely represented from these benches, I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that we might host a fine Burns supper next January, and I'm sure we will extend an invitation. I'm sure it has been observed by the House that there's nae wee sleeket curin timorous beasties. As a doctor for well over 30 years, of course my interest is in health and the future of the NHS, which I consider to be one of Britain's greatest achievements of the 20th century. But the biggest healthcare challenge that we face is developing integrated services to look after our older citizens with complex needs, breaking up the NHS and franchising it out to rival private companies, destroys collaboration, and makes achieving that even harder. And if the Secretary of State was still in the chamber, I would point out to him that the Commonwealth Fund he referred to, that report is based on data prior to April 2013, when the Health and Social Care Act came into effect. In Scotland, after devolution, we went back to our roots, got rid of trusts, and again became a single, unified public NHS. That has allowed us to work right across our country in developing quality standards and improving safety. We have our challenges. NHS in Scotland isn't remotely perfect. We face the same challenges as the rest of the United Kingdom. But despite the quips that were made by the Secretary of State, it does come down to cooperation and not competition. But it's important to remember that the NHS does not give you health. Health comes from having a decent start in life. Health comes from strong public health measures to tackle things like the prevention of diabetes before we are swamped by a deluge of chronic illnesses in the future. But its most important foundation is what happens in childhood, and as we now sadly know, what even happens during pregnancy. In my constituency, despite unemployment falling from 6% to 4%, child poverty since 2010 has climbed from 20% to 25%. That's 1 in 4 of our children growing up in poverty. These are not the children of shirkers and slackers, as is often applied. 64.5% of them have a working parent. This is due to short hours, low wages and benefit cuts. I've heard the welfare state spoken about through gritted teeth in this House. But allowing young lives to fail will cost society more money in the long term. In prisons, in police, in addiction services and in long-term benefits. We need to invest in our children, but not just in them, in their families to change their future. There's no point in talking about focusing on schools if they're sitting shivering and hungry at home at night. Mr. Speaker, the first duty of any government is the security of their citizens. Not with regard to replacing weapons of mass destruction, but the real security that comes from knowing you can keep a roof over your head and food on the table. Mr. Speaker, I have served the people of Ayrshire for the last 19 years as a breast cancer surgeon. I hope I will be able to serve them further, despite missing that post. In my work here, I intend to work for them in the constituency and speak up for them in this House.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
I congratulate the Honourable Lady. I think that the House would want to know that in 1991 she served for a year and a half as a medical volunteer at the UN hospital in Gaza. So she's not had an easy life in serving others. She may find looking after the constituents easier than that. I hope that she'll join the United Nations Parliamentary Group, and I look forward to cooperating with her and trying to get effective family functioning so that parents don't just have the resources, but they have the confidence and the competence to be good enough parents and give their children a good start in life.